Lamont from Tone Talks. I wanted to have this discussion about Black Lives Matter. I've had one prior. I think it's even more relevant now. I'm going to talk about a lot of things, most importantly, Patrisse Cullors, from what's coming out about the $3 million worth of homes. I'm hearing a lot of stuff come out from everyday black folks across this country that don't understand certain elements, whether it be the fact that these deals, like when the overall deals from Warner Brothers and the like, they're not $1 million deals, to how book sales actually are tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands. They don't buy $3 million homes. Maybe if you are Stephen King and you have this great deal because you option your stuff to movies. I don't think we're placing her properly, but in addition, I don't think we're placing Black Lives Matter properly. Part of the fundamental problem we have with ADOS is I think we got contrasted with the group that isn't, in my view, organic. I'm going to use an article from tablet.com that really digs into Black Lives Matter and kind of, I think, frames, to me, possibly the source for these multiple millions of dollars. I'm going to talk about, Mike Brown's father and his whole thing about not receiving that money from the Black Lives Matter organization. And I'm also going to dig a bit into some of the issues chapters are having with the way that money was spent by the main organization for Black Lives Matter. But before we do that, please support this channel. Subscribe, donate, press the bell, share this video. My Patreon is Tone Talks. My site is tonetalks.org if you want to support, donate. Share this video, because what I'm seeing for a lot of people is they're not really able to frame how bad this thing is. My last show was on intersectionalism. I do recommend you go see that show. I think that a lot of that show ties into how we got here, where we cross agenda items from gender to sexuality to even in some case sex when we talk about trans issues, and then we mix it in with race. But America had slavery and Jim Crow, so none of it makes sense. America had slavery and Jim Crow, so none of it makes sense. I said that twice for a reason, because America had slavery for hundreds of years for blacks that were considered less than human, subhuman, followed by Jim Crow. And what these young women have done is melded multiple intersectional types of oppression and created kind of their own space where they get to be the most oppressed. But we don't deal with their own personal backgrounds. You have Alicia Garza, who was raised, to my understanding, by a white Jewish male. I have no idea how you're more oppressed than Mike Brown or Eric Garner or Alton Sterling. I have no idea how you created that avenue. And I just think it's showing up in how this group moved in terms of organization, donations, everything else. When you look at ADOS, you have to go back, despite all of the statements about Yvette and Piefer. You got to remember that Farrah Stockman went and tried to show, and I don't know why it wasn't in the New York Times article, other than the fact that they don't want it in the New York Times article, that there was no donation by Piefer into ADOS at all. Zero. Yvette took no money from Piefer. That's not what we see with Black Lives Matter when we dig into all of the backdrop of how this group came to be such a national powerhouse. It isn't what you think, and I just want to show you what I believe it to be based on the information that I've read in detail. So we're looking at this discussion. What I'm going to try to do is not show any pictures of this woman's house, Patrisse Cullors, to avoid any accusations of doxing or anything like that. I've seen recently with several people, they've had their social media just interrupted as a result. So we're just going to keep this on a critical analysis level, but we will mention the value of the homes. What I see is a lot of discussion around this Cullors thing and not dealing with the core principles from misuse of gender, period. Like what you see over and over again is this reorientation of a movement built on the deaths of black men. Particularly, there are some black women, but let's talk about it. This is the extension of mass incarceration over policing. When you look at these places from Minneapolis to parts of the South, to even the East Coast, you see over policing, particularly of black males, and they built all the prisons for men. We even see that when we look at Dante Wright. We look at it and we see in Minneapolis that out of all the prisons, only one is for females, and it's like low level to high level, and it's only 600 people, but the rest of them are all male. So that's what it's built out of. But then we flip it and reorient around a discussion of black women and leading homes and leading movements, but we leave out black men as if they have this privilege or advantage. So you build the movement on their struggle and oppression, their heightened struggle of oppression, and then you switch it around like they have privilege and advantage, and that's why you mention black women, because they struggle uniquely and more than black men. That's why you would say women and not just say black. In addition, you just don't understand Marxism, you don't understand capitalism, and you won't be honest that you're just a capitalist, which is what you are, and hide behind both the gender and in the idea that, activists should be able to support themselves. No one's talking about whether someone should be able to feed themselves. No one's talking about whether someone should be able to buy a home, say in Ferguson, for $120,000. No one's saying whether you should be able to do those things. What we are talking about is when you present certain philosophies and they interject certain things, having the means to support that. When you present yourself as a certain person philosophically, in terms of Marxism, in terms of what that means in socialism and property ownership rights, living by those principles. What we are talking about is understanding. When we look over and you see this thing where she did with some museum dancing in the streets over white supremacy. I don't need you to dance with all kinds of people about white supremacy. I need you to talk to the black male deaths that are happening in Ferguson, in Minneapolis, and all throughout the South, that are happening in black communities, and stop playing these games of intersectionalism. Can we talk? So we had an interview with Marc Lamont Hill. In that interview, Marc Lamont Hill does, to me, not a great job, really, of it feels like a promotional interview more than an actual journalistic critique, because it's so easy to deal with. There's major issues here. I don't know if it's a combination of just not understanding Black Lives Matter in context of the tablet article I talked about earlier, or it's just as a matter of just trying to build your audience. You don't want to offend per se, whether it be black women, whether it be black community. Don't bring her on then, because now is the time to ask the hard questions, which is, do you understand communism? Do you understand Marxism? Do you understand that you are a capitalist? Do you understand what the consequences are, good and bad, of being a celebrity and how you hold yourself out? And we look over at celebrities. When you have somebody like Halle Berry sell their home, one of the gifts and advantages is that they can get the price up and get it out in the news that they're selling this home by presenting it just on the thing that they are selling the home. Here you have a woman in colors who is a celebrity through her Warner deal, through signing with CAA, which is for all representation. We'll talk about it in a second. And then doesn't want to deal with the celebrity, so mask it around sexism, racism, using those cups that people actually need for the kind of racist things that are going on in their local communities. And also, at the same time, still keeping the celebrity privilege that allows her to have a millions and millions of dollar home. So we talking. So in the interview with Marc Lamont Hill, I'm going to read some of her takes. There were some interesting takeaways, and I think that one of them I have to say is when I look at her definition of the salary. I've never taken a salary from BLM Global Network. First of all, I'm a college professor. I looked it up. I saw like small colleges. They, $30,000, $40,000? That's the first of all. I'm also a TV producer. She goes into these things. What I did not hear from her, I heard from Mark in the question, was the speaking fees and the consultant fees. She had a consulting company, as I understand it. In that consulting company, you see BLM co-founder Patrisse Cullors, consulting firm, was paid more than $20,000 a month, $20,000 a month by LA Jail Reform Group while she served as chair. This is what people are talking about when they talk about BLM money. We're not just saying whether you got paid by this BLM Global Network where it's tied into Tides Network and all the money goes in there. We're asking the question of where did you get the money from? Was it BLM? I come back to something that I continuously say. Independent. This woman is, to me, in the role of a journalist or a secondary source. She's a secondary source that came into a narrative of Mike Brown, a narrative of George Floyd. a narrative of Minneapolis community, and basically now has interjected herself as the first person, and that is what she uses to sell around the world, around the nation. But in reality, you look at Minneapolis, and in a recent article out of NPR, they said their BLM chapter disbanded after Philando Castile due to lack of funding. Disbanded. So when George Floyd comes around, why are your signs there? Let those local groups have their signs there. And I just think for a lot of us as black folks, we got to get honest. She says, all of my income comes from the work that I do. We know that. The question is the work you do so deeply intertwined with being part of Black Lives Matter that it's actually just coming from BLM? And I would say, from what I see from the outside, of course, it seems like that. That consulting fee, while it's not coming from the BLM group network, it still is as a result of what we're talking about. Don't play like you don't understand what we're talking about. This is not just about right-wingers making arguments. This is about black folks demanding black politics, and as a result of your position, people like a group like ADOS, American Descendants of Slavery, who basically put reparations on the national table by galvanizing black folks, can't get funding because we get labeled a certain way, and you exist. I need for people to understand black politics cannot be a centrifuge for all lives matter politics, or we never will have politics. Even with the consulting jobs, we have this article here. Black Lives Matter co-founder Patrisse Cullors consulting firm was paid more than $20,000 a month by LA Jail Reform Group while she served as chair. I doubt she's including that in the context of when she says BLM didn't pay her. Well, that's what we're talking about. We're not just talking about it in terms of legality. We're talking about it in terms of morality. We're talking about it in terms of independent of BLM. I don't see the value. Again, I'll say it yet again, that what I do is believe that she's like a secondary source. Like, say a journalist comes in and tells somebody else's story. What she is effectively, to me, in many ways, she represents someone who comes in after the deaths of George Floyd, Trayvon Martin, someone who comes in who isn't the mother, isn't the family, someone who isn't on the ground there, who is basically representing herself as first person. And I don't believe she is. You know, everybody has the right to have their feeling. That is her value when we come into speaking fees all the way into quote unquote television production. So we then have the actual mother of Tamir Rice. We see that here with the mother of Tamir Rice saying, mother of Tamir Rice tells activists to stop profiting off her son's death. Samira Rice and Lisa Simpson, mothers of Tamir Rice and Richard Richner, respectively, are slamming civil rights activists, attorneys, and organizations for allegedly exploiting the deaths of their sons. They asked Tamika Mallory, Sean King, Benjamin Crump, Lee Merritt, Patrisse Cullors, Melina Abdullah, and the Black Lives Matter Global Network to step down and stop monopolizing and capitalizing on their fight for justice and human rights. And that is essentially what I argued. I look at the NPR article that came out where it talks about the disbanding of the Minneapolis chapter of Black Lives Matter after Philando Castile's death as a result of a lack of resource, lack of structure, lack of support. And then when George Floyd dies, they come all of a sudden 2 days into the march, and we start seeing these pre-made posters and everything. And you have to wonder, you know, why can't we just go straight to those activists? In this interview, at a point after the Marxist section, you have her speak to receiving these $90 million of money and then funneling it out. That's not what your role is. If you're not going to do the activism, just point people in the direction of what group they should actually give the money to. They did not give the money to you for you to be a conduit. They gave the money to you to actually create change. What you see is that you're producing yourself as a middleman when you're supposed to be the actual man. And if you don't have that resource, you should just point them to these small nonprofits that are working in Minneapolis, that are working in Louisiana, that are working in Mississippi, that are working in Florida, and then just step away because you don't need to receive it. You're not a reservoir to decide who and what to talk about. If that's the case, all of our politics, our black politics, will end up as black trans, as about black feminism. It will omit the black males whose bodies lay on the ground that created the wealth itself. Black families that come out of all of that destruction. We see the same thing going on as far as a statement about from Breonna Taylor's mother there in Louisville about Black Lives Matter Louisville, and how she feels about them, and also a rep there, and how she would want them to step back. And I think they see the same thing from Mike Brown's father out of Ferguson. We didn't see any of this money, demanding the money. You see so much of this, and everybody's trying to mask this by talking about black feminism, by talking about gender oppression, by talking around the reality. How did you get this $3 million worth of house? I'm saying this to you because she told us that she's a Marxist. In specific words out of this interview, homes that I bought directly support the people that I love. This is the words of Patrisse Cullors to Marc Lamont on this Black News Network. And that I care about. And you can speak to so many black people and black women particularly that take care of their loved ones. Let me say this. This gamesmanship around the emotional reaction to saying the word black women in many ways is being utilized to undermine black politics. Just say black people. See, you say black women as if black men have some kind of secured advantage. So the movement is built out of the deaths of black men that died far too early at the hands of police far more often than anything else. The reason why is because the level of incarceration. Just talk about black community and stop this gamesmanship around the genderizing in the favor of an oppression through being a black woman, which expressly, through omission, but expressly is saying that there's a privilege in being a black male that doesn't exist because the movement sits on their desks. And I see this and I'm looking at the discussion, and you continue with her words, and you start to get into a convoluted workaround where she seems to not understand her own political philosophies. She told us she's a trained Marxist, then buys $3-4 million worth of homes at levels that black folks across this nation will never see. And you see this reality of people trying to justify that through basically defining capitalism, whether they know it or not, her and others. Doesn't a person have a right to make money? Yeah, if they're not a Marxist. So also, let me say this. Making a living wage and $1 million homes are gaps apart. In addition, moving into a white community that's 80 and 90% white, and then talking about black community is gaps apart. What she says when Marc Lamont asked her about the conflict of being Marxist is a question that Marc Lamont fails to follow up and challenge. He knows enough to know that she just said she's a capitalist. This is her response. Is a critique that is wanting. The way I live my life is in direct support of black people, including my black family. Makes first and foremost so many black people that choose to invest, they choose to invest in their family. That's what I've chosen to do. I have a child. I have a brother with mental illness. I support my mother. I see my money as not my own. I see it as my family's money as well. That's personal property rights within your family. It's still capitalism. You didn't say you see your money as the collective black community's money, and that home as the collective Black Lives Matter's home for all organization. They can come and go as they please. You can't back into saying that you're a capitalist and then use your family and then basically play on the fact that people might not understand. You just defined yourself and personal property rights and yourself as a capitalist. And you're a manager you're at the manager level. So basically, we don't have a business. This isn't a business, meaning Black Lives Matter. What we have is that black men in particular, black families suffer, black men are dying because of this over-policing, this incarceration. There are riots as a result. We come in with signs. We're going to make the signs. The profit comes off of that. That's the business. And then as a result, you're the manager class and you're able to reap rewards as you speak out about black lives. But the funny thing is, you change the message that comes out of that to trans rights and into black feminism instead of black family, and also particularly those black males, and dealing with what they're going through very, very specifically. In addition, you do stuff like what I'll talk about in a second with Jane Fonda, where you lionize the fact that you don't have black male leadership. The thing that's going on is we need to slow everything down and have an understanding of some basic things. Marxism. Marxism is a social, political, and economic philosophy named after Karl Marx. It examines the effect of capitalism on labor productivity and economic development, and it argues for a worker revolution to overturn capitalism in favor of communism. Marxism. She's a trained Marxist. Some people might say, well, I don't really understand what communism is. Communism. Communism is a political and economic doctrine that aims to replace private property in a profit-based economy with public ownership and communal control of at least the major means of production and the natural resources of society. So it is directly in conflict with even what she said. And for Marc Lamont not to challenge what she said on this black network and talk about black feminism and misogyny and all kind of stuff, it just shows me that there's a lot of gamesmanship going on. When I look at this thing, I have to go back and I have to explain personal property rights. Private property rights are centralist. Private property rights are central to capitalist economy, its execution, and its legal defenses. Capitalism is built on the free exchange of goods and services between different parties, and nobody can rightfully trade property they do not own. The main legal property rights are the right of possession, the right of control, the right of exclusion, the right to derive income, and the right of disposition. The right of exclusion. I want my family in the house, but not black people at large at any time throughout the day, week, or month. Right of disposition. I will leave this to my child and not to black America. This is capitalism. You did not describe socialism because you said we all, I don't see my money as my own. Well, the bank does. Chase Bank does. Because when it comes time to put an ATM card into that account, it's your name on there. And I just think that wasn't even drilled down. And also for her to say that to that question, it just shows there's a lot of convoluted nonsense going on. In this video later on, I'll be talking about this tablet.com article. I'll be breaking into discussions. I really think you should go back and watch my intersectionalism video that really breaks down the data around everything from abuse to wages, to the history of even employment, and how there's been a real kind of three-card Monty about what really happened within black America and how we all were oppressed as black people in different ways, and that we shouldn't be talking about it in this narrative of like double minority and those kind of languages if we don't want to be honest about what intersections of gender and race do. When we talk about black males, which is what Black Lives Matter largely built themselves out of, deaths of Trayvon Martin, deaths of Mike Brown, death of George Floyd. And I see so many discussions. We saw the conversation about doxing, and I have something here that talks about doxing, and you see doxing isn't illegal if the exposed information is part of the public record, arrest records, traffic violation, marriage and divorce records. Again, I would go a step further that when you hold yourself out as a celebrity and you sign a deal with CAA overall to represent you, you are now an actress, a writer, everything. You're a celebrity, not an activist. You can't see, she moves back to activist when it's comfortable. You are a celebrity. So as a result, pictures of your home. I'm not talking about the address, the physical address. Pictures of your home. It's very similar to what we see when Halle Berry does it. See, when celebrities sell their home, they get a benefit of premium because people want to live in that house. They can get notoriety on selling the house and possibly sell it faster or for higher. You can't take on that benefit of being a celebrity and having that notoriety and then try to play yourself back through the lens of black female normalness that everybody thinks they're talking about when you say I'm just an activist. No, you have decided to do an overall deal that largely to me doesn't make sense, but an overall deal with Warner Brothers and then do a publicity campaign which makes you into celebrity. And I think for a lot of people, they don't understand that celebrity and this concept of exposing addresses and everything else, while physical addresses are wrong, we show their houses all of the time. And what I feel is happening is that a lot of things are being moved around. Black female, celebrity versus personal, activist, Marxist versus capitalist. It's just like moving cards and not being honest about the whole play out of things. But that's what you get when you start really dealing with everything from them being on Cosmo. She's a Marxist though, and they on Cosmo and they on Vogue, and to think that happened organically and to not deal with the fact that what we actually see is a whole apparatus behind them. Again, I'll show you as we go through the show. I don't have to guess. I'm going to show you with documentation how this developed over the course of the last 7 years behind a lot of big donors. And I'm saying to you that when you look at ADOS, it is an organic movement, small donations by people all across this country to get the message of this show and the Yvette Carnell show, even our ADOS conference, small black church in Louisville pushes that and supports that. We don't have these large-scale, multi-billion-dollar, million-dollar benefactors that we're beholden to, nor as a result do you see, like what you see is that the apparatus is pushing the Black Lives Matter organization as much as it stands oppositional to us making an argument about ADOS being a specific group, and then black folks at large just also being a group, but not ADOS. And I think that, even when we look at the overall deal with Patrisse Cullors, we have to look at that overall deal. We have Black Lives Matter co-founder Patrisse Cullors lands Warner Brothers Productions deal. Now, I say to you again, I'm not saying somebody can't get millions of dollars. In the case of Donald Glover and also Issa Rae, they had these shows, whether you like them or not, Atlanta and Insecure, and as a result, the ability to secure niche audiences allowed them to basically show that they could produce shows over multiple seasons and to keep them on board and make sure that they weren't poached as talent. They gave them an overall deal. They even in the article say that that's 8 figures. They don't say the amount. Now, this young woman, Patrisse Cullors, when you look at it, she has little to no credits in film. So, first of all, it made, to me, little to no sense to do an overall deal with her. I really would like to know way more details about that. You saw the same thing with the Me Too woman. So basically, as an activist, you get an overall deal that usually is given to a showrunner with multiple years of producing shows, somebody that produced shows for years, and you're getting this deal. But then also, people outside are projecting it like that you got millions, when I find it hard to believe that you even got more than tens of thousands, if anything. And so this blocks black politics because people think that you have arrived and you're not being honest about that arrival and telling us the whole truth and being clear. Just say it, like I didn't get any money or I got very little money. That becomes a mask so that we can believe that these homes come out of these production deals when in reality your IMDb does not support that. So you tell us that the TV shows paid for this or whatever. You insinuate, let me say, because it's one of the jobs that you used on the interview. But you only have one writing credit for one show, one episode on a channel called Freeform or something. Come on, man. This is the credits. You got one writing credit. You got some producing credits on some small documentaries. This is not it. I need you guys to stop bringing up that Warner Brother deal or as some way to actually produce large scale wealth coming into pockets. Just for me, I don't see it, and I need people to understand how to read just basic IMDb's. I don't know why she got an overall deal. I think that all of this is just questionable and deserves much more clarity, particularly given that it's coming out of and actually, to me, choking black politics. The other thing I see is this Jane Fonda. I don't know if y'all remember this Jane Fonda interview. Jane Fonda and Patrisse Cullors on the sobering realities of racism. Reading a little bit of that interview to you. Patrisse, I thought it was a joke. June, my assistant, was like, Jane Fonda wants to talk to you. And I was like, what? Jane said, I'll tell you what. I did the same thing with the Black Panthers back in '70. I called David Hillard up in Oakland, but it didn't go as well because things were different. First of all, he was a man. So we see this shift by Jane Fonda to make basically men oppressive or men shut them out. And then you see this connection between Patrisse and Jane on that reality. No, he was a black man. Say that. He was a black man and he didn't have time for your white celebrity. And so we continue on. And one of the things that is so potent about Black Lives Matter is that it is woman-led. Patrisse says back exactly. So it's potent that Black Lives Matter is woman-led on the backs of black male death, on the realities of black mothers not being involved in that leadership that birthed these black men, and then being shifted into a trans and then sexuality discussion instead of a reparations for ADOS, American Descendants of Slavery, not anybody at all. That's a good thing from Jane Fonda's mind. And Patrisse agrees. This is the interview. Patrisse says, Jane then says, people don't know that the press doesn't say that, but you know, when I started getting copies of these flyers that are being put out by the Black Lives Matter about how activists take care of themselves, self-care, who does that? It's our job. Jane says the Panthers wouldn't do that. You know what I mean? Patrisse says yes. I remember the Panthers doing breakfast for black communities. I don't know what she's saying. I don't know why Patrisse agreed. I just know I don't need Patrisse Cullors holding hands, getting these jobs through the lives of black men and black families and black communities and black mothers, and then acting like she is talking for us. I need you to see it. Jane says, I was just a bougie white back then, but you know, we're developing a real friendship. I don't feel like you're judging me, although there's a lot to judge. I mean, it's hard when you've been privileged all your life. To really understand, to try to understand that what it means to go through what people of color go through. People of color. Some more, she says some more stuff. Patrisse responds, this is what I admire about you. For someone who's literally an icon, celebrity, rock star, not only are you so down to earth, but you're always, come on, man, this is not that. I'm just saying to you, that is what, see, that kind of acquiescence, that kind of lack of political will in the moment, that kind of, I don't want to do this interview because it don't make no sense for Black Lives Matter, for Minneapolis, for Louisiana, for Mississippi, is what's missing. I feel like we have to have this discussion because when we look at interviews like the one with Marc Lamont Hill, we don't get that. Yeah, Marc Lamont Hill, we understand that you can read the basics, meaning Black Lives Matter Global Network says that Patrisse Cullors did not receive no money from. We need you to ask the harder question. How much did you receive from your consulting firm that ties directly or indirectly to Black Lives Matter? Did you receive the $20,000 a month from the jail program, which sounds like basically a workaround from Black Lives Matter? I need you to ask the investigative questions or just don't do the interview. I can get the basics on any news network, on any little blog or anything like that. So let's start off with this article. How much of her money is actually going to charitable causes? Head of New York City Black Lives Matter chapter calls for a probe into the organization's co-founder. As it's revealed, she has spent $3 million on 4 luxury homes. For those people that don't seem to kind of grasp it, because I think that there's a severe problem amongst Black America with understanding our racial status, not because of what it should be, but just what it is on its face. I think we create a whole narrative around wealth that allows us to cope, but doesn't allow us to do politics. So when I say allows us to cope, it allows us to get through day to day as we work amongst white folks, transferring wealth intergenerationally. But it doesn't allow us to do politics because we don't understand how shut out we are. So when these things come out, we don't know what they mean. It means that she's getting money from a white source, most likely. The book doesn't do it. The Warner Brothers deal, I don't know why they would give her money. I think that they would have given her no money. And then like if she produced something, maybe we'll give you some money. And we're not talking about millions and millions of dollars until you did something really fabulous. I mean, show and proof. And I think Black folks in Oklahoma or Alabama or Mississippi, and no disrespect to saying that, because you guys have expertise that is in other areas that I might not know. What happens is you guys take like these articles, and I mean when I say these articles, I'm talking about these kind of articles here. Warner Brothers TV Group signs overall deal with Black Lives Matter leader, co-founder Patrisse Cullors, and project like a multi-million-dollar intake to make it all make sense so you don't have to do the politics. That doesn't mean she could afford them homes. Even if it did mean that, she's making it off of Black Lives Matter. I don't know how that would, create a conflict in your mind as far as like her investment. But I'm telling you that didn't pay for them homes. To me, when I look at this thing, I don't see numbers, and I don't stop. I don't even know if she got any money on that deal. I come back to this article, and I just want to frame this thing. Please support the channel. I know this Sunday pop-up show. The head of New York City's Black Lives Matter chapter is calling for an independent investigation into the organization's finances after it was revealed a co-founder snapped up $1.4 million home in ritzy Los Angeles. Patrisse Cullors, who is co-founder of Black Lives Matter and self-professed trained Marxist. Understand she's a Marxist, socialist, whatever, and she's buying these $1 million homes now that she recently purchased a plush property. 88% of the residents are white and just 1.8% are black. And we still don't even know if that 1.8%, and I would bet, are largely renters. So this is basically a reflection of black people just not having wealth to be in these neighborhoods. We're talking down payments in the range of, $500,000. I'm just saying to you, we have to frame this thing by going all the way back to some information that I've shown you guys before, to give you some context. Part of the problem I run into talking to black folks day to day is they don't know black folks are poor. And when I say poor, I'm talking about they don't register on the economic, like, let me make it more clear. There's a article, we've shared it on ADOS, that I did with Matt Brunick. Matt Brunick used to work at demos.org. We pulled the Federal Reserve data back in 2016. And what we showed for the first time ever is how many black millionaires there are. We're talking about millionaires with everything they have. The first thing I'll say to you is that these black millionaires are primarily older boomers that just left up on timing. So they bought a home cheap. They didn't buy it at $2 million. They bought it at $300,000 and were gentrified into that asset due to being in Los Angeles or being in the Bay Area or being near DC. But you don't necessarily see that all across the country all that much. But to make it more clear, I want to read some of this article and come back to the Patrisse Cullors to explain to you just how crazy it is. Not just that this happened, but that you believed it could have happened off of books and a Warner Brothers Inc. deal. Without the family car, black wealth barely exists. The 2016 Survey of Consumer Finances released last week, providing extensive new data. Median wealth is being shown as having increased to $162,000 for middle white American family and $16,600 for the middle black American family. But what isn't being said is that the Federal Reserve includes the family car in these numbers. As noted by Professor Edward Wolf, it would be better to use a wealth concept that excludes these kinds of durables, as that they are not readily convertible to cash. So what they're doing is basically creating a false narrative even amongst the middle of black America. When you see that 17,000 middle black family number, because what they're including is the family car and the clothes. And that's almost like, I think it's about 14 to 15,000 of the 17, with the actual car, the family car, being 10 of it. When we exclude the family car, we get a somewhat different wealth narrative than the one being told across media platforms nationally. Without the family car, the middle black family has a net worth of $4,100, $4,160 to be exact. The middle white American family, in contrast, is still worth $140,000. So when you take those things out, it only drops them down about $20,000, and plus they might inherit those things. But this is where it gets more specific to what we're seeing from Cullors. There's a similarly daunting gap between black families at the 99th percentile and their white counterparts. The 99th percentile black family is worth a mere $1.5 million. $1.5 million. $1,574,000 to be exact again. While the 99th percentile white family is worth over $12 million. This means that over 870,000 white families have a net worth above $12 million, while out of the 20 million black families in America, fewer than 380,000 are even worth a single $1 million. So here we have this young woman that does activist work, projecting, buying homes, $3 million worth of homes to be exact, in a world where out of 20 million black homes, only 380,000 break $1 million in net worth. I need everybody to understand how this only happens because she had an infusion of capital from somewhere. And it isn't the book. It isn't the Warner Brothers. You have to go to the most likely reality, which is it ties back to Black Lives Matter and many of the questions that people have had. I'm looking at this discussion. And so again, as ADOS, and this lets you know that there's agendas out there. As ADOS, we dealt with attacks about PFER or something, and you saw Fair Stockman actually dig into it. Fair Stockman being the New York Times writer. Yvette was and received no salary. But we have to have that on our page, on our Wikipedia page, and fight people and deal with all kind of innuendos about us receiving monies. But here you have her in $3 million a home, and it's kind of clear that she's being paid a large sum of money from this organization. And it isn't just about what you think it's about. I'm going to dig into a tablet article that really digs into like the documents and tells you the backdrop of the people that are pushing and have pushed and have created how Black Lives Matter got so big. It's not, so Black Lives Matter to me is an all lives matter movement built around multiple agendas, diffusing the realities of dealing with how these ADOS men are dropping dead at the hands of police and others all across the country, and how you address that through reparations and a black agenda, specifically focused on ADOS families, American descendants of slavery families. We also have a black agenda on ADOS 101 that goes to larger black families, but you start with a reparative justice program specifically for ADOS families. That's not Black Lives Matter. Some critics argue that living in $1 million home was at odds with her social justice mission. So, you know, we have this backdrop of Michael Brown's father, and we go all the way back to Ferguson. Somehow we forgot Michael Brown. This is what gave birth to Black Lives Matter. They came out of Michael Brown and Ferguson. You see him demanding millions of dollars out of or a chunk of money out of that $90 million, and basically saying they received next to nothing. Next to nothing. The family. I also see this reality of black men deserving, black men being shut out in so many ways to me in leadership, and as we transition into a intersectional like argument that I showed in my last show really doesn't hold up when you look at the BLS, Bureau of Labor data, and several other factors, even present day, from incarceration all the way to unemployment. And you see this overarching reality of centering yourself. So Patrisse Cullors does this and signs this Warner Brothers deals, and everybody runs around as if that somehow made sense. I think for all of us, we start to unpack this thing and ask the question, well, what's really going on here? Because to me, I mean, this is Ferguson. The homes are anywhere from $80,000 to $115,000, $120,000. Get a house there. That's what you believed in. These people are worth below the median. They're below the median. So below the $4,000 or $1,500 that you know, if you want to take out the TV and clothes, which shouldn't be counted, we're down to like 50. They're probably worth $800 and $900. Go down there and build those communities up. If you're the activist that you say you are. I see everybody and they talk about this thing and they talk about pocket watching. Well, when you move into this space and you project what you're projecting and you have money that might not be your own and you sit on a cause that first it's a social cause for the entirety, and so you sit on top of money that was collected on the deaths of black men and women, but particularly black men when we look at the numbers, and it's not just the ones that we've seen, it's the ones that we haven't seen. This comes out of the massive gap in incarceration we even see between men and women across races, but particularly within black race. You see these deaths triggering her access. Her story individually is not what drove this. It is the tragedy of the black community, and particularly the tragedy of black male death and black male life. And now she's selling it And that's all. I mean, what is she gonna write on? Nobody really wants to hear about her growing up in Van Nuys and in poverty. I think that we also don't understand when you talk about a person, 30 and 40, $3 million properties. Your family is probably people that co-sign to that amount of wealth, and it involves inheritance and the like. So if you don't have that family, you probably are getting it from some other source, and that source probably is tied into Black Lives Matter, if I had to call it. In addition, even people that talk about this book don't understand books. So this book also is co-authored and also published by a major publisher. So the money that you're talking about. So she co-wrote this book. So that means two people got to get money. And then also it's published by, I think, Macmillan, which means it's not even self-published. Understand that publishers, let me share this with you. Once the book is published, most publishing companies pay the author around 10%. So if you show a million copies, that's $100,000. So up front, give you $50,000, $70,000, and you split that with the other author, and then you get $100,000 and split that with the other author, and you take out taxes. That's not a $3 million home. Make it make sense. I know everybody will try to say, well, it could be something different. We'll make it make sense. I'm just telling you that the only way this really makes sense is to dig into the $90 million or even beyond that, to look at the kind of multiple millions of dollars that transferred around an agenda to push black politics away from ADOS, American descendant of slavery, family centered, to this all lives matter agenda that was pushed by people far above Patrisse Cullors, and then use this as kind of the flag of it all. Black Lives Matter Foundation received over $90 million in donations last year. NYC BLM leader, Blast Movement co-founder. This is another article for $1 Million Property Binge. Marxist. The reason I did this show is I see a lot of people that aren't necessarily economists or even accountants or high wealth holders, and they just are just saying stuff that doesn't really make sense. Well, she does have a book deal and Warner Brothers deal. It's like, we're talking about $3 million in homes as a black person. Part of the reason I gave you the metric earlier is to show you how small a number of black people. Look, if 380,000 black families break $1 million, and they're primarily old boomers, that's their pension in their home that they got through gentrification, being in a certain neighborhood. The amount of black people under the age of 40 that are able to accrue that kind of asset, they might be in the tens of thousands, and I mean, I just don't understand if we don't know how to, and we're talking about 46 million people. I don't know if we know relativity. What television, I think, in part has done to people in America, but particularly black people, is made them multiply the aberration to the point where the aberration is more normal than the actual person in your life. So your brother that's been in and out of jail, and all of his friends that have suffered from the same, and you know why, but one Jay-Z, or one Patrisse Cullors, and you make them into people and you don't know anything about their backstory, and that's how you resolve yourself and cope at night, not understanding that the numbers you're giving out, the way that you're framing people, it isn't even coherent. It isn't coherent to sit back and think that she paid $3 million for homes off of a book she co-authored that's titled, go back to the book. Title of the book is When They Call You a Terrorist. Let me put that in the airports and everything else and see, let me read the whole title. When They Call You a Terrorist, a Black Lives Matter memoir. I don't see that selling all across airports in America, because that's what, I guess you're saying that she sold 10 million copies, even then, still not enough. It's just not, the numbers aren't there. Numbers aren't there for $3 million in homes. I'm just telling you, you vacation. I need everybody to see it. New York City Black Lives Matter leader, Blast Movement co-founder for $1 Million Property Binge, Marxist BLM leader, buys $1.4 million home in ritzy LA enclave. Protesters pound windows. The Black Lives Matter Foundation has revealed it received more than $90 million in donations last year, despite the movement being splintered by ongoing feuds. The Black Lives Matter Global Network Foundation, and that's what I'm going to read to you in a second about this group that they created, announced the massive influx of money late Tuesday, the first time BLM has disclosed its finances in nearly 8 years of history. So they didn't give no finances for 8 years. with $8.4 million in expenses and $21.7 million committed to local chapters. The group ended 2020 with an approximate balance of $60 million. We are no longer a small, scrappy movement. We are an institution, the foundation boasted. The financial disclosure came amid heightened tension in the network of activists, with a group of 10 chapters called the BLM 10, including ones in New Jersey and Hudson Valley, splitting in November while publicly ripping the main organization. To our best of our knowledge, most chapters have received little to no financial support from BLM GN since the launch in 2013. The 10 chapters insisted in a public demand for accountability. BLM said donations exploded following the May 2020 death of George Floyd. So George Floyd dies. They run out there. There's already protests going on in Minneapolis by the local people. They run out there with their signs that are printed and basically kind of take credit to me. To me, they took credit for something that wasn't really them. It wasn't theirs to take credit for. And then money started funneling. But the money funnels and nobody has any accountability on what actually was done with the money to actually lead to any kind of like activism or actual policy for black folks all across this nation. BLM co-founder Patrisse Cullors, the foundation's executive director, insisted that the financial boost in 2020 was radically different than previous years, however, without releasing further records. Because the BLM movement was larger than life and it's larger than life, people have made very huge assumptions that what about our actual finances look like. Okay, larger than life. Look, BLM wasn't larger than life. The people behind BLM made it look like it was larger than life. And then you'll see when I read to you how they manipulated and moved that. Patrisse Cullors is the co-founder of Black Lives Matter that was matched by online interest with the BLM GNF website, getting a record 1.9 million visits on June 2nd and almost 5,000% increase over the most trafficked day in March. BLM vowed to use the money to be more active. Then we get notice of of all these homes, $3 million in homes. Mike Brown's father and Ferguson activist wants a chunk of the $90 million that BLM raised during the racial reckoning. You have Mike Brown's father basically speaking to the fact that they've received little to no money, and you have him demanding $20 million. Now, I don't know where he got the amount from, but he's saying that basically this was done on the back of my son's death. You have Patrisse Cullors doing this book, signing Warner Brothers TV deals, and then you also have her buying $3 million in homes that would take, $500,000-$600,000 down payment, let alone paying, $12,000, $15,000 a month in mortgage. I'm just saying, how are we doing this? But let's get more specific. I got an article here. I want to share some of it with you. I'll put it in the final information section of the video so you can click it yourself. Is Warren Buffett the wallet behind Black Lives Matter? The Tides Network is a powerful instrument leveraged by billionaires working to change America while shielding their philanthropic dollars from public scrutiny. This spring, in the wake of the killing of George Floyd, the movement became in a restless climate of nationwide demonstration touched off by the killing of 17-year-old Trayvon Martin. An activist named Alicia Garza uttered the phrase, Black Lives Matter. Understand that's just a generic phrase. You shouldn't even be able to use that phrase as your group and act like you actually said something that is more than just generic. That's like taking credit for the word black. A few months later, in October 13, Garza took a job with an organization called the National Domestic Workers Alliance. Black Lives Matter, and we're taking a job with the National Domestic Workers Alliance. And the nonprofit immediately saw a dramatic increase in its funding from organizations tied to some of the wealthiest people in the world. This spring, in the wake of the killing of George Floyd, the movement became a global interest. Some 1.1 million individual donations worth an estimated $33 million flowed into its coffers. Large corporations, especially in Silicon Valley and retail, have been quick to follow suit with brands like Square, Ubisoft, Google, Spanx, Tom's Shoes, Nike, etc. The received wisdom echoing the official mythology around Black Lives Matter, Global Network, Inc., co-founded by Alicia Garza with fellow activists Opal Tometi and Patrisse Cullors, is that BLM is a grassroots movement that rose up organically out of the widespread rage sparked by viral videos of Black American men killed by police officers. According to this account, the political priorities of activists in Brooklyn screaming at cops and calling to defund the police have been fused with those of suburban moms in Peloton t-shirts hand-painted signs with their kids using the BLM hashtag of large multinational conglomerates. An unusual union of protesters in the corporate boardroom spurred on by nothing more than everyone's shared outrage over racism. There is, however, another version of events in which the heartfelt dedication to racial justice is only the forward-facing side of a more complicated movement. Behind the street-level activism and emotional outpouring is a calculated machinery built by establishment money and power that has seized on racial politics, in which some of the biggest capitalists in the world are financially backing a group of self-described trained Marxists, a label that Cullors enthusiastically applies to herself and the group's other co-founders. These bedfellows, whose stories and fortunes are never publicly presented as related, are in reality intertwined under the umbrella of a fiscal sponsor named the International Development Exchange, a modestly endowed West Coast nonprofit with origins in the Peace Corps, which for decades supported local farmers, shepherds, and agricultural workers across the global South. IDEX has in the past 6 years, understand we're talking about the global South, not the American South, has in the past 6 years been transformed into two distinct things: the infrastructure back into the Black Lives Matter organization in the U.S., and also at the same time an investment fund vehicle driven by the recruited MBAs and finance experts seeking to leverage decades of on-the-ground grantee relationships for novel forms of potentially problematic lending instruments. So you have this money coming in, and then it's possibly being used for lending. I want to take a caller, and then I'll come right back to it. Caller, what's your name? Where you calling from?
Yeah, I'm calling from Philly. Thank you so much for this work. I think it's obvious that this is a grift. I think it's obvious that the financial backbone of this country is the exploitation of atrocities committed against black people. And whether it's direct or whether it's virtual, and this is what we're seeing now. We're seeing that people exploit brutality visited towards black people in order to become financially, in order to improve their financial lives. I mean, this is just ridiculous. I work in healthcare in Philadelphia. I work primarily for Medicare, Medicaid recipients. Black Lives Matter has no connection to black people in Philadelphia whatsoever. That organization has absolutely no connection to black people in Philadelphia at all. It's sad to say this. I don't know what to say, man. I'm just stuck. I just wanted to say that. Hold on, go ahead. My girl wants to say hi. She didn't say hi last time. Hi, Tom.
Hey, how you doing? What's up? What's up?
All right, brother.
I love the kids. All right. So, going back to this article, thanks so much for calling in, man, and spending your Sunday with you and your children to actually listen to something of this level. Thousand Currents, again, this is the article by tablet.com. Warren Buffett, the wallet behind Black Lives is Warren Buffett, the wallet behind Black Lives Matter. Thousand Currents did not respond to requests to address the relationship between their nonprofit administration and the business interests of their donors, but a worldly observer might notice synergies between IDEX's entrenched footprint across Latin America and Warren Buffett's interest in Liberty Latin America, the telecom operator, was rapidly expanding its services. As a nascent, and I'm skipping down, as a nascent political project, the three co-founders of BLM, Garza, Tometi, and Cullors, grew it from its origins in the summer of 2013 as a social media campaign into a national network with more than 30 chapters in cities and regions across the U.S. Garza, in particular, became an increasingly visible presence who helped shape BLM into a powerful entity. In her role as the organization's most visible steward, she was guarded about the outside shaping forces that influenced BLM's formation and flexible in how it could exert its growing influence. Describing it in 2014 as an ideological and political intervention, Garza didn't want BLM to succumb to the narrow nationalism that can be prevalent within some black communities. So ADOS is, I don't agree with the framing, but because we're talking about reparations, what she's almost is saying right there is that we don't really want to deal with just that, what ADOS black people need to have done. But that means you just don't want to do Black Lives Matter work in America. Because this country was built on the backs of Adolf's people that are suffering and dying, and you're selling their story to make your group. BLM didn't want, this is her words, Garza didn't want BLM to succumb to the narrow nationalism that can be prevalent within some black communities. Rather, as she wrote then, her co-founders were in process of building a coalition centered on any identity which could ostensibly foreground a connection to black lives. So not only did we have intersectionalism, we then have, after the intersection, outgrowth where anybody who intersected could then use black's narrative, Adolf's black narrative, to basically, I guess, create an alternative or additional movement in their minds. Rather, as she wrote then, her co-founders were in the process of building a coalition centered on any identity which could ostensibly foreground a connection to black lives, including black queer and trans folks, disabled folks, black undocumented folks, folks with records, women, and all black lives along the gender spectrum. Those who might seek to support disabled folks and folks with records without concern of their skin color ran afoul of the movement's aim by perpetuating the level of white supremacist domination by reproducing a tired trope that we all the same, Garza wrote. This is what Black Lives Matter was kind of made to do. And this is what we say, to shift black politics from an Adolf centering to a basically an all lives centering, and then still use the word Black Lives Matter. In 2015, the connection between the Buffett giving to the two organizations became explicit, and that year Novo gifted $3.72 million to IDEX, a sum greater than the organization's past 3 years of total revenue combined. Of that funding, $700,000 was specifically earmarked for the support, understand, the support of the Black Lives Matter movement. BLM co-founder Garza likewise saw her employer, that national domestic workers thing, get a significant bump in revenue from Novo with an exponentially increased $4.5 million in unrestricted funding. And I wouldn't doubt that if you looked at her salary was bumped as well. This ties to the whole question of how you buy even $3 million homes now. Skipping down, and you can read the whole article. It's about 30 pages on your own, but I'm just reading some of the relevant sections because this is entirely important, and I'm going to come to a caller. It is interesting to wonder whether Novo's involvement with Thousand Currents and the Black Lives Matter movement is intended to have a similar result, namely to channel the specificity of the Black Lives Matter movement into a larger civic universalism. Let me say that again. It is interesting to wonder whether Novo's involvement with Thousand Currents and the Black Lives Matter movement is intended to have a similar result, namely to channel the specificity of the Black Lives Matter movement into a larger civic universalism that grows increasingly distant from the movement's initial concerns, meaning the deaths of Mike Brown, of Trayvon Martin, of even George Floyd and Breonna Taylor. That grows increasingly distant from the movement's initial concern in favor of supporting a broad, neutralized political platform that may help the one party win elections and appease its own powerful interest groups, and focuses less on the grassroots problems faced by black families trapped in declining and physically dangerous neighborhoods in cities like Minneapolis, Washington, or Baltimore. This is why it's important where Cullors lives, because if you live with the white wealthiest Americans, what motive, even individually, do you have to actually change that for black folks, especially if your wealth is coming from that? You know, independently, I just don't see it with her. I don't see any narrative or story other than selling the narrative story of Trayvon and Mike Brown and everything else. The infusion of $33 million in donations into BLM has recently led to new scrutiny of the group's financial arrangements. Several inquiries were also made by predominantly conservative media organization into why Susan Rosenberg, a convicted domestic terrorist, held a senior position on the board of Thousand Currents. Thousand Currents is controlling the money at this point, I believe, in charge of the movement's money. In a statement released by early July, Thousand Currents clarified why they had scraped their website of information about their board's identity, as well as previously posted documents on the organization's finances, pointing at attacks aimed at discrediting the black-led, multiracial mass movement of millions of people around the world who are speaking out against state-sanctioned violence, anti-black racism. A few days later, on July 10th, according to documents filed with California Attorney General, the Thousand Currents board unanimously transferred the fiscal sponsorship of the BLM project to another California-based nonprofit known as the Tide Center, which along with the Tides Foundation exists underneath the control of the Tides Network, an umbrella organization which manages $591 million of revenue in 2018. In their statement to the Attorney General, Thousand Currents wrote that the transfer was in the best interest of all parties, citing BLM's growth and need for greater support. This is all going on behind the scenes with this $3 million worth of property. If all these organizations and layers of administration seem a bit confusing and opaque, that is the point. Shuttling Black Lives Matter over to the Tides Network does more than shield Thousand Currents from intense inquiry. It allows BLM to join a massive repository of projects that can be administered behind extra layers of protection in the form of donor-advised funds, which allows donors to anonymously fund projects while still reaping the tax benefits, and multiple organizational shells, which include the Tides Network, Tide Center, Tide Foundation, and a slew of other incorporated nonprofit shell organizations, which are housed within a single institutional silo. So you give the money to one group, meaning BLM, and you think you're helping like that black community, meaning Minneapolis, like black people in Minneapolis, but you end up helping, I don't know, anything from, if I had to guess it, some farmers in South American country to maybe some climate control stuff. I'm just saying, I think that all of this is part of what we're seeing. We're seeing a whole shift, and black folks got to get more complex. It's much more complex than saying she sold a book and then that's how she paid for $4 million in house or $3 million in house. It's much more complicated than saying, well, this is the way to go, because this way actually leads you out entirely. It's much more complicated than just saying the most simple version of the story. Let's take caller for the name. Caller, what's your name? Where you calling from?
Hey, it's me again. It's Eddie West North. A couple of points. Again, a great show. One of the first points is that talking about Los Angeles. If I'm not mistaken, Cullors is from Los Angeles. You just said bought a home out here. Okay, so if ADOS in California is about at 6 to I think 9% of the population, and with that percentage being mostly in LA County and places like Antelope Valley. You understand what I'm saying? It's the numbers and the data and the possibility of us being able to afford that home is nil. That's the first point, because I don't think that ADOS understands that we are literally living on the bottom of the bottom in California,
yeah.
Okay? Which is one of the most expensive states next to New York. Okay, so the next point is, as a activist, advocate, you're not going to be rich. You're not able to buy millions of dollars of homes. That's not going to happen. I can say that firsthand, because I've always worked with the homeless. I've always worked with the disabled before I became disabled. I have never made a dime. Matter of fact, my situation has become worse behind advocating for folks. So however she's doing it, ADOS needs to understand that she's hustling all the way backwards, and it's for herself and not for us.
Come
so
on,
that's the first thing. And I'm sorry, go ahead, son. I didn't hear that.
Go ahead. I said, come on, man. Go ahead.
The next thing is start paying attention to the fact that when you see these people who are lining their pockets with money that belongs to you. Okay, as an advocate, you're not supposed to be getting paid. You're doing this for the love of your people, because you realize that you're on the bottom. You understand what I'm saying? Even if you did not have the language to say we're on the bottom, mentally you understood it. I said, thank you, Tom. I appreciate this live. Bye.
Man, I'm gonna take a few more callers because North just got everybody going. We come back to this article. Again, you go read it on this website, tablet.com. The Tides Network is a powerful instrument leveraged by billionaires working to change America while shielding their philanthropic dollars. Is Warren Buffett the wallet behind Black Lives Matter? Great section in there says, it is interesting to wonder whether Novo's involvement with Thousand Currents and the Black Lives Matter movement is intended to have a similar result, namely to channel the specificity of the Black Lives Matter movement into a larger civic universalism that grows increasingly distant from the movement's initial concerns in favor of supporting a broad, neutralized political platform. I tie that back to my intersectional show I did last week. I don't think we understand the long-term damage that's going to do. It doesn't matter if you understand it. You're probably feeling it right now with the frustrations, particularly of your young black males, but your young black community. Your young black community has no wealth, has no voice, and that voice, even when it comes about, is trampled upon. So Minneapolis blacks get loud about the conditions they're living in through George Floyd's actual death, and then it's trampled upon by Black Lives Matter that runs in with signs to talk about everything from trans rights to farmers in California, migrant farmers in California. Caller, what's your name? Where you calling from?
Hi, Tone. This is Cynthia, and I agree with Adolph North. The BLM movement was a very big grifting movement. I did, for a brief time, financially contribute to them, and you know, I'm very disappointed in how they turned out. But what really turned on the red flag for me is I live in Ohio, and I went to a Democratic, some type of a fundraiser or whatever activity back here in 2016, and the Black Lives Matters headquarters was in an affluent white community. That blew my mind. That blew my mind, and I immediately stopped contributing to it. It told me right there who was controlling it.
Man, hey man, you know, we got our chapter meeting in about 30 minutes for ADOS, and I tell you right now, you know, we're trying to keep this thing together, but we don't have the donations. There really is just us organizing as black folks, really truly grassroots. The problem that has happened is that this group has put a shadow over black politics, to me. A shadow that makes it seem like there is black politics when actually, as I just read in the Tides, it appears to have so much more going on outside of us. And then even the agenda of the three women that started, it seems like it came out of intersectionalism and then took it to a whole new level of confusion and craze when you start moving from black men all the way over to trans people and saying, well, they suffered, and so we need to all talk about it. I don't know what they're talking about. Caller, thank you so much for calling in. Anything last thing you want to say?
Can I say, yeah, I do want to say one thing. That gender identity, those are horizontal issues. If you go to the Wilson, I think it's called the Wilson Studies or whatever, it's out of a UCLA. But anyway, they do studies on under the gay umbrella of poverty and things like that by racial ethnic groups. And let me tell you this: 20% of white folks who are up under the gay category, who identify themselves as, you know, L to Q or whatever, they self-identify as being in poverty. 39% of black folks identify as L to Q, have, you know, they identify themselves in poverty. Now, when you are not gay and you're black, you still have a higher percentage of black folk in poverty. So what I'm saying is, it's not your sexual orientation or your identity, it is your racial group classification. And if you are and if you're black, especially Adolph, you are tethered to the bottom. The numbers tell you. So your gender identity doesn't mean a darn thing. That's all I'm saying. And it's called the Wilson Institute.
Man, that's a great call. Thank you so much for calling in. Great calls. Let me take a new caller. Caller, what's your name? Where are you calling from?
Hi, yes, this is Autumn. I'm calling from Southern California. I'm in the Indian Wells Valley. I just wanted to comment about Black Lives Matter. So I've been doing some research because, of course, you know, the media has been saying a lot of things about them, negative and positive. One of the things that really troubled me is that you cannot find any kind of nonprofit identification number for this group. And that's troubling for me.
I think you should go read. Make sure you go read the article that I'm going to put in the section, because the Tides also has extensive documentation. I mean, the tablet.com has extensive documentation. I think part of that might be they operate under somebody else's nonprofit, possibly. But you can read this
article.
Exactly.
And that's what I was getting to. And that's kind of fishy to be operating under a different nonprofit. Like most, you know, movements have their own. It's really strange that they don't have one. But you can find, other like smaller chapters, right, of the Black Lives Matter movement that have their own identification numbers. It's just weird to see that like the overarching organization doesn't have their own, and it's potentially being, worked under another larger organization. So that should be fishy to anyone, right, who's been even considering supporting this organization or movement.
Well, I mean, if you think about it from what this tablet article is exposing, maybe when you give the money, it's about giving money to get a tax rebate, and then also knowing that it's going to go to a bunch of things, not just black issues. So everybody's kind of in on it. Thank you so much for calling. I want to get through and give everybody a chance to speak. Let me take another caller. Caller, what's your name? Where are you calling from?
Hello?
What's your name? Where are you calling from?
Oh, hey, my name is Will from 860. I just wanted to, point out that I see that the Black Lives Matter situation, I'll point back to Nelly from Fuller, that they're just controlling both sides on the narrative of the conversation when it comes to reparation to overshadow people from a more tangible conversation. And it's just more and more evident that they should be held accountable for that. It's just not a good look. And the people that really need it the most, they're equipped from. That's just unacceptable.
Yeah, especially when you see somebody like Patrisse Cullors. Thank you so much for calling. Buying $3 million worth of homes. I mean, you got, and then it's just a lot, bro. Caller, what's your name? Where are you calling from?
Hello, this is John from Asheboro, North Carolina. I just looking at and listening to the, your overall live, and this is clearly just another form of philanthropy fraud. You got all these big companies that see an opportunity to drop a bunch of funds into what they call philanthropy, but they get these huge tax credits, and then they get to go back and get that money and fund all these other products and other projects, underneath that cover. And anybody can see this. It's been done before. I mean, if you look at Malcolm X died broke, Martin died broke. If you're out in the front and you're leading the movement, there's no money coming your way. I mean, who is this girl? Her book deal did better than Barack Obama? Stop.
Yeah, that's what I was trying to. That's part of the reason that made me want to do. I saw a lot of black people trying to put the puzzle pieces together, but being dishonest about what their limitations were and understanding things. You can't do this off of whatever the title, the terrorist title that was her book. You can't sell.
And you hit it already. I mean, she's getting published by a publisher.
Yeah.
Publishers don't give you that kind of money.
Yeah.
And then you got to have distribution, and then you got to have. I mean, is it even on Amazon? I mean, what is this? What are you talking about?
Yeah, it is on Amazon, and it was places, but I just don't think it has the legs that people. I just don't think, before we even get to legs and the kind of book and the first of all, you just don't make this kind of money off of that. This money is coming from another source, and that source is likely tied up with this Tides thing and this whole tablet.com article. And I come back to it. You even before that, you don't really have authentic black messaging. You have this fractured, intersectional, very odd messaging sitting on the back of black male death in particular, but black female as well, and black family struggles. And then you have this whole thing where we're going to reshift it. We saw that with Alicia Garza. She does a study where it's supposed to be 30,000 people. You don't need to survey 30,000 people, first of all. But then she makes decisions in the study to oversample trans, oversample black college-educated women, because these
right.
you don't get to do that. You can do randoms, but you don't get to oversample certain people to give your own view and then call it the study for black view. That's basically a version of what they did with Black Lives Matter.
It's middle of the road, and it's milquetoast, and it's inclusionary, and it's transitional out of blackness. We got to get everything Black Lives Matter to mean everything but being black.
Well, man, don't even say another word other than that. Everything but being black is where I'm gonna leave you at, because that is a call to end the show. This is Tone Talks. I wanted to come talk about this Patrisse Cullors property, $33 million of property, in context of a larger discussion about Black Lives Matter, and give you guys some material to go review, while also giving you a space to actually have dialogue in the chat, which we have. We have 1,000 people in here on a pop-up show. Hopefully we can spread the message. Share this video. Let your family see it. Get a spirited discussion going on in your family, in your neighborhood, in your community. Again, this is Tone Talks. Please go to tonetalks.org to subscribe or donate. Share this video, because if we don't have a discussion, nobody else will. Thank you.